Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my channel. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I want to present 20 more Let's Not Meet stories for your viewing consumption. Now understand that none of the stories here are actually written by me, but rather by the lovely people at Let's Not Meet. You should seriously check them out in the links in the description below. But besides that, I would like to issue a further warning. The stories here are a little extra graphic than our usual affair. If the subjects of rape, domestic violence, and pedophilia will disturb you in a significant way, I highly recommend that you click off the video now. That is your only way of avoiding that type of content. In the meantime, for the rest of you who are brave enough to stay, sit back, relax, and turn the lights down, and welcome to the dungeon. I'm your host, That Creepy Reading, and today I'm signing off.
Almost Kidnapped by the Same Person by Unknown Rin. So this happened in my sophomore year of high school. I live in a pretty bad neighborhood, but since I've lived there all my life, I know everyone around there. Even the drug dealers and the thugs. They watch out for me, since my mom used to be in a car gang. Where I live, we have trolleys, so I have to take a specific trolley to get home. Where I get off is probably known as one of the worst areas, but as I've said before, it's around the corner from my house, so I don't have any worries. I usually cut through this alley as a shortcut, and here's where it starts. I was walking toward the alley and a red Honda pulled up beside me. There were 3 men in the car. One was driving and 2 were in the back. He opened the passenger door and said, "Hey cutie, want to take a ride with us?" I didn't respond because my mother always taught me not to respond to things like that. I walked into the alley and I heard the man say, "Get her." I heard more car doors open and presumed it was the men in the back. I ran as fast as I could down the alley because it leads to my street. I didn't look back until I got to my door. About a week passes and I didn't see the car of men, but I clearly remembered their faces. As usual, I was walking home from the trolley headed to the alley. You'd think I would have learned my lesson from walking in the alley alone, but no, I didn't. While I'm walking, I see a parked red Honda. I didn't see anyone in it, and it wasn't on, so I didn't think anything of it until I feel someone grab my arm. I screamed as loud as I could. It was the same guy, and the other 2 were hiding in a crevice of the wall. I bit his arm, he let go, and I ran. This time I told my mom, and she was furious. We filed a report, but the men were never found. Now every time I see a red Honda, I get anxious.
This happened to me 4 years ago. It's by far the most extreme and life-threatening situation I've ever been in. Now, I'm not writing this to evoke sympathy or pity. My story is a testament to the grim reality that creepy, demented, and twisted people exist in this world. The eyewitness account you're about to read is 100% true, and it's mine. For some understanding, this happened in the United States. It was the summer of 2012? My longtime boyfriend and I had recently gotten married. Even though we were dirt-poor college students and lived in a dinky apartment, we were having a blast. That particular summer, we gathered with our friends at the local movie theater almost every weekend. There was one just down the street from our apartment that had really, really cheap movie tickets. A night out was under $10, which was certainly within our budget. Anyways, one Thursday night I received a call from this group of friends inviting us to watch the midnight premiere of the newest Batman movie. I just finished working a 12-hour shift and was pretty tired. I almost refused the invitation and thought of crashing in my apartment instead. However, I don't like to miss out on the fun. And it was a movie I'd wanted to see for a while anyway. Certainly, it wouldn't do any harm to stay up later than usual and miss a few hours of sleep, right? So at 10:30 p.m., we met at the theater. We passed large cardboard cutouts of Catwoman and Batman as we walked inside, greeted by the smell of buttery popcorn and the chatter of excited moviegoers. The ticket booth was to the right of the entrance, and just above that was an electronic list of movies being played. The 12 a.m. showing of The Dark Knight Rises was displayed up there in bright red letters. Being paranoid that the tickets would sell out quickly, one of my friends swung by earlier that day and purchased tickets for all of us. We bypassed the ticket line and went straight to the ticket taker. She smiled at us and kindly directed us to theater number 9, which was on the right side of the lobby. If only I had known what I do now, that among the crowds a killer was lurking, that as I walked across the tacky red and purple carpet towards theater number 9, I could have been walking to my death. I would have turned around in that instant and gone home. I would never have gone to see the movie at all, but, of course, I'd no way of knowing what was about to happen. Oblivious to that peril I was putting myself in, I pushed open the doors for Theater 9 without giving it a second thought. The hallway in this theater was shaped like a U, and you could go either right or left. Theater 9 was the largest screening room in the building, perfect for accommodating the crowds that midnight premieres brought in. The screen was motionless and gray, not even the previews had started yet because there was still a good hour and a half to go until the movie actually started. We entered on the right side, so all of the seats were to our left. I remember being surprised at just how packed that theater already was. Just about every single seat was already filled. And much to our dismay, at first it seemed like we couldn't even find a spot to sit together. Now, the way the theater was set up, there was a section of seats right in front of the screen. The area was flat, and there were about 5 rows of seating in this section. A lot of seats in that section were empty, but sitting right in front of the movie screen sucks, and none of us wanted to even sit there. One of my friends then spotted a row with 5 empty seats all next to each other. Perfect for the amount of people we had. The seats were about 3 to 4 rows up from where the seating rows started to elevate. We ran up the stairs before someone could take the seats and filled in. My husband Brock sat in the 5th seat. I sat next to him, and my friend Samantha sat next to me on my right side. Her boyfriend Tommy sat next to her, and another friend named Leo sat in the aisle seat. We spent the next several minutes casually chatting, joking around, and laughing. After a while, my 3 friends went to the lobby to buy drinks and that addicting movie theater popcorn. While they were gone, Brock and I passed the time by people watching. The theater was bright since the lights weren't exactly dimmed yet, and I could see everyone clearly. There were lots of people dressed in Batman t-shirts and hoodies. One person even had a mask and one of those shirts with an attached cape. There were a lot of kids in attendance as well, which wasn't surprising because even though it was a Thursday night, it was still summer vacation, so that meant no school the following day. Of all the people I saw, the person I'll never forget was the little girl sitting in our same row a few chairs away. She was really cute, blonde with blue eyes, and she passed us several times on her way to the lobby, each time coming back with various snacks and popcorn. Overall, people seemed very excited to see that movie, and the room was filled with energy and laughter. After what seemed like an eternity of waiting, the lights started to dim, and the previews began, and just like every movie I've seen before, a quick animation flashed across the screen reminding us to get refreshments from the lobby. I mean, come on, we were already devouring that popcorn like ravenous animals. To also silence our cell phones and to make sure we know where the emergency exits are. The animation had this ugly CGI cat in a tuxedo that was sitting in a movie theater. I casually glanced at the bright green emergency exit signs that were on the left and right side of the movie screen. I didn't think much of the reminder, like usual. After that, I only remember one preview for The Man of Steel. The others, I'm not sure what they were about. When the movie started, the theater erupted into cheering and clapping. The title of the movie, The Dark Knight Rises, exploded onto the screen. This was followed by the scene where Bane is hijacking a plane. I thought the scene was pretty cool and it caught my interest right away. Only when the movie started to get a little less interesting did I remember just how tired I actually was. I decided I would close my eyes to the most boring parts and get a little bit of rest. I mean, I'd been awake for about 20 hours at that point, so I was rightfully sleepy. My eyes were closed for most of the duration of Batman and Catwoman's encounter. I don't really remember what was going on in that part of the movie. Perhaps some of you've seen it and know what I'm talking about. Anyways, when I opened my eyes again, Bruce Wayne was on his computer digging up information on Catwoman. This is the last scene I saw. I never got to watch the rest of that movie, because all of a sudden, a loud bang erupted from the left side of the theater. I sort of screamed a little because it startled me. A strange smell started to fill the auditorium. It was like the smell of a firework. So I thought it was like a cherry bomb or something similar. Had someone thrown fireworks into the crowd as some sort of prank? Then down near the right side of the movie screen, the dark silhouette of a person caught my attention. They were just a black frame against the bright movie screen. A series of flashing lights was coming from this person. It was a weird moment where time literally slowed down and everything went strangely quiet. I was completely frozen, unable to move and really unable to think at all. It was like my brain had just stopped working entirely. Brock, however, caught on almost immediately to what was happening, and he grabbed me. He pulled me to the ground and laid on top of me, shielding me with his own body. At this point, time and sound returned to me. I could hear the gunshots ringing out across the theater. People were screaming. The movie was still playing on top of it all, creating this chaotic explosion of sound. I realized the flashing lights I had seen were bullets flying out of a gun barrel. An instant sensation of adrenaline flooded my body, and there was absolutely nothing I could do except lay there and hope to God that the bullets I heard ripping through seats and walls wouldn't go through me too. At one point, shrapnel hit my head, cutting off a good chunk of my hair, and as I reached for the spot to make sure it wasn't bleeding, hot pieces of metal fell into my hands. I was lying face up so I could see everything that was happening. The lights from a still-playing movie danced across the ceiling and walls. My friends were on the floor with me. Our unfinished bucket of popcorn was spilled all across the floor. Leo had his legs sticking out into the aisle because there wasn't enough room for him to hide completely behind the seats. And at some point, Samantha's water bottle, which had been in the cup holder between our seats, exploded. Water splashed all over my face. The smell of gun smoke was absolutely overpowering. Riot-grade tear gas made me cry and caused me to cough uncontrollably. And there was another smell too. That horrible, metallic smell of blood that I'll never forget. I remember my lower body feeling wet all of a sudden. For some reason, I thought this came from the leaking water bottle, but I soon realized that that wasn't even the case. All of a sudden, things went strangely quiet. The bullets had stopped for some reason. Tommy shouted, "Let's get out of here." We took advantage of the opportunity and made a run for it. We ran down the stairs across the front of the screen towards a bright green exit sign. We crammed into a small closet-like space where the door was. It was so dark, we had a hard time even finding it. We were screaming, slamming on the walls to find this door, blinded by this tear gas and dumbfounded by shock. Then finally my hands felt the metal door handle, and I pushed against it with all of my strength. The door flies open, and the light of a nearby streetlight flooded our eyes. We pushed against the door so hard that we all fell over onto the concrete. Samantha lost her pink flip-flops just outside the doorway. As I scrambled to my feet and literally ran for my life, I realized my legs were red, absolutely soaked with blood. It was like I dipped my legs into a bathtub full of it. I checked my body all over and realized I wasn't injured at all. Where'd the blood come from? I looked behind me and realized that the blood was my husband's. He'd been shot in the leg. A massive gaping hole had ripped through the lower half of Brock's right leg. His foot was barely hanging on and dangled lifelessly. Leo and a young man I didn't recognize were carrying Brock because after falling outside the door, he'd lost all his strength and couldn't walk. I was completely shocked. I'd no idea he'd been injured, especially since he was right behind me the whole time and managed to escape the theater all by himself. How he did it on one foot, I'll never know. At this point I screamed, but my scream was so loud that it alerts nearby construction workers. At the back of the theater there was a narrow parking lot, followed by a grassy lawn, and then the street beyond that. The construction workers were doing road repair on the street, but as soon as they heard my scream and saw us running, they stopped working and watched what was going on. And I'm not sure why that is such a vivid part of my memory. Anyways, they carried Brock along the back sidewalk, all the way to the end where the corner of the building is. And that was quite a distance, several dozen feet. My husband then collapsed from exhaustion and pain, saying he couldn't move anymore. He lay down and a puddle of blood started to form beneath him. I looked back and realized we had left a trail of blood leading from the door all the way to our current position. I was trembling. I knelt beside Brock and glanced around to see who else was injured. Tommy had been shot in the knee and the hip and was further away in the parking lot. The teenager who helped my husband was also injured. His dad and mom were with him. His mom was sitting against the wall and looked like she was going to pass out. She was bleeding from several locations. That family escaped at the same time we did. I guess they heard the bullet stop and decided to make a run for it too. We were all lucky, because the shooting was still going on inside. I had to take off my shirt and use it to stop the bleeding. I'll never forget how lifeless and limp his leg felt. And I imagine that's what a dead body must feel like. I got blood all over my hands and arms. The police showed up really, really fast. I'd say we were only outside for a minute or two before the red and blue sirens filled the night and rushed to our location. We were literally a block away from the police station after all. A female officer stood by us the whole time until paramedics arrived, which that took a very long time. Brock was one of the last people who was taken to the hospital. He was bleeding out for almost 20 minutes before an ambulance pulled up on the same street with the road work. At this point, he'd become almost unresponsive and was on the verge of unconsciousness. Several massive guys rushed across the grass with a stretcher, loaded him onto it, and then ran with him back into the waiting ambulance. I wasn't able to go with him because there was another injured person in that ambulance, and it was just too crowded. I wandered around to the front of the theater alone, unsure of where my friends had went. My blood-stained shirt and a pool of blood were left behind on the corner of that sidewalk. Walking through the crowds felt like a dream. I couldn't believe what just happened. People were in hysterics and crying. A lot of people, such as me, were covered in blood, and, like me, I'm pretty sure the blood staining their skin and clothes wasn't their own. A lot of people seemed to notice how lonely and dazed I had looked, so they kept me company and even offered me a ride to different hospitals to find Brock, because I hadn't been told what hospital he was taken to. I hung around these people for a while as police swarmed the area and asked us what we saw inside the theater. The whole parking lot was on lockdown, and we weren't going to be allowed to leave anytime soon. It was around 2 a.m., so it was very dark outside still, and it was pretty cold. Wearing only an undershirt and shorts, the flashing red and blue lights of what seemed like 100 police cars were blinding. I remember seeing a big police vehicle pull up that says something like Crime Scene Investigation Unit on it. I think that's when it really sank in and hit me. I started to get sick to my stomach and wanted to vomit, but somehow I was able to hold it back. Eventually, police started letting people leave. I jumped into my truck and booked it out of there. I was going 90 to 100 miles per hour through red lights and residential areas without even slowing down. Stupid, I know, but I was desperate to learn the fates of Brock and Tommy. I was in such a panic that I didn't even think to go back to my apartment, grab my cell phone, which I'd totally forgotten, and call my parents or someone else to help me. I was angry, upset, scared, and most of all, still in a state of shock. Was I going to lose Brock only a month shy of our first wedding anniversary because of some psychopath with a gun? Thankfully, by the time dawn rolled around, I found the hospital he was treated in, and that was about the next city over. Maybe 45 minutes from the theater if you're going the speed limit. I was so happy to be there, and the hospital staff was so welcoming and understanding. After making sure I wasn't injured at all, they let me wait in the ICU room that Brock would be placed in when he was done recovering from surgery. I was so glad he was alive. Brock and Tommy both had survived, though many others weren't so lucky. I found out the following day after much needed sleep on a hospital couch that 12 people were killed in the shooting, and over 70 were injured. I remember the first thought, 15 were killed, but the real number was 12. The little blonde girl sitting in my row did not survive. She died in the theater no more than a few feet from us. She had been shot multiple times, and a heartbroken officer who cried during his court testimony tried unsuccessfully to save her by carrying her out of the theater and having her sent to a hospital. Tommy was rushed to a different hospital in the back of a police vehicle. He underwent surgery and made a full recovery. The bullet missed his hip bone and narrowly missed his urinary tract and bladder. According to the surgeon, my husband lost almost half of his blood. But Brock made it to the hospital just in time. Any later and he would have been dead. He underwent several blood transfusions and was in the hospital for 21 days. The wound to his leg was severe enough that they had to amputate it after trying unsuccessfully to save it. It had been so long since the shooting happened that my husband, friends, and I have been able to recover from it somewhat. The event was pretty horrifying and left a scar definitely. I wouldn't consider that part of the story to be creepy, though. No, the creepy part is the shooter himself. I later learned much about him from the murder trial that would follow in the coming years, though my encounter with this man was incredibly brief. He's affected my life greatly. Just to know that people like this exist is disturbing. He's certainly one twisted individual that I'd never want to see again. I learned everything from watching the televised trial that took place in early 2015. The guy was going to school for neuroscience or something in California, and I guess he was a pretty smart guy. However, for some reason he had this obsession with killing people and had this stalker mentality. After dropping out of his university, he moved to my state and chose my local theater to commit a mass shooting. Before that, he was planning on hiding along remote hiking trails up in the mountains, jumping people, pulling them into the woods, and killing them there. Though he never went through with that idea, he stalked my theater for months and had this whole shooting all planned out for the night of July 20th. Though I never saw him before this, it's unnerving to think this guy could have been watching us every time we went to the theater, and we'd never even have known it. We were completely unaware of what he had planned against us. This, as you could imagine, completely ruined my sense of security, because who knows what the stranger next to you is planning on doing. I came very close to the shooter, but I never actually saw his face in person until I was forced to testify in court. Of course I saw his mugshots on television, but while in the theater I only saw him as a dark silhouette in the shadows, like a demonic figure rendered from the darkest and most sinister nightmare. He was even in the hallway that we passed upon running for the emergency exit. The only thing stopping him from killing us there and then was his jammed assault rifle. To commit the crime, he ordered a few thousand rounds of ammunition, riot gear and armor, tear gas, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. He took pictures of himself, which were shown in court, wearing all this gear like some sick trophy and holding up these weapons with a menacing smile. He dyed his hair orange and put it in these creepy black contacts while making devilish faces into his camera, something that made me sick just looking at it. And before driving to the theater with all of this gear in his car, he booby-trapped the entire apartment and set it to explode if anybody opened that door. Then once at the theater, he posed as a moviegoer and brought a ticket for the movie, even bought that ticket. And I think the ticket had Theater 8 on it, which was next door, but Theater 9 had more people in it, so he went into number 9 instead. He was in the few front rows. I must have passed him several times in the lobby while he was there. Maybe he'd even seen me too. At some point during the movie, he got up and went through the side exit, which didn't have an alarm for some reason, kept it propped open with something, then went to his car to put on all his armor and grabbed his weapons. Then he came back inside and started shooting, and when we escaped the theater, we ran past his white car, which is parked right at the exit. We didn't even notice it. At some point, he came outside, and he would have seen us there on the concrete. And I don't know what stopped him from shooting people that were outside too, but he could have easily ended us there, and then if he had wanted to. I think the hardest part for me was facing this twisted individual in court. I'll never forget rising as they called my name, walking down the center row past my family, other survivors, and crowds of news-hungry media personnel. I sat right across from him, maybe only 10 feet away. While his orange hair was gone and he wasn't wearing black contacts, being so close to him was a creepy and unsettling experience. My encounters with the man are certainly ones I will never forget. I can now say that I've come face to face with a true, deranged psychopath. He just had this blank stare in his eyes the whole time. And if eyes truly are the windows to the soul, then his soul is filled with nothing but a cold indifference for those he had murdered and harmed. He wouldn't even look at me. Sitting across from him in court was the second time I had knowingly been in the same room with this man, a man who had tried to take my life, but thankfully failed, a man who would end up spending forever behind bars. And at the end of it all, he was sentenced to 3,318 years in prison for his crimes. This is the man who tried to kill me, the man who has caused countless nightmares and fueled the fires of my paranoia, the man who hurt my friends and family, causing years of untold grief for my husband because he'll never be able to walk the same again, the man who stole the innocence and joy from a 6-year-old child, who went into that theater alive and came out dead, to the man who carried out the worst mass shooting in Colorado history. Let's not meet again, ever. And I hope you rot in prison.
Surprise by Celestial VX. This happened a couple years ago during the first semester of my sophomore year of college. Being a female in college trains you to become sensitive to potentially sticky situations, especially when you're a frequent partier. I was 19 at the time and had already had my fair share of creepy experiences with men, although most of the time they were at most very uncomfortable situations at parties or bars. I had never had an encounter that made me genuinely fear for my life, and I always felt like I could get away safely without having to deal with any further contact with the individual. I consider myself a woman with good gut instinct. Another important thing to mention before getting into my story is that at the time I was a bit, eccentric. To shorten a very long story, I was still in active addiction and almost completely off my rocker during this time, which reflected in my appearance. I had lavender-colored hair, several facial piercings, and would dress like a walking acid trip. I also used to hula hoop all the time for fun. I still do on occasion, but not very often. And I had a few friends who did as well. When the weather was nice, we would meet up at night on the weekends and practice together, amongst other things. I would often be treated negatively because of my appearance. A handful of times, psychiatrists accused me of drug seeking during my diagnostic appointments while trying to get treatment for my anxiety and depression. And if it was late at night, it wasn't uncommon for me to be stopped by the police and questioned about my activities. At this point, it didn't surprise me anymore when something like that would happen, and I had developed a piss-poor attitude towards the cops. The university I attend is huge. We have about 60,000 students and 4 campuses which are decently spread out from one another. The campuses are integrated into the city that it's located in, and generally speaking, the city is an absolute shithole. But the areas closest to campus, although not that much nicer in appearance, are generally a lot safer. A good amount of students live in this off-campus housing area, and we have a very extensive bus system so that, in theory, students can easily travel between campuses in order to get around, but, well, the buses don't travel into off-campus territory, so if you want to get to somewhere around there, you have to walk to your destination from the bus stop. That night, I decided to meet up with one of my friends to hoop. We both had class until late at night, so we agreed to meet at around 9 p.m. at her place. Now, she lived in a house off campus about a mile away from the closest bus stop. The route was shaped like an L, and the bus stop was at the very top of the L, so the walk to the corner was about 3/4 of a mile, followed by a right turn and another 1/4 mile to the walk at the end of the street. The first part of the walk wasn't notorious for being bad, but her street could get a little sketchy at times. It's also worth mentioning that at about a block away from the bus stop en route to her house is a pretty large hospital. So I took the bus as far as I could, and once I reached the closest stop, I began walking to her house. I put my headphones on and, with hula hoop in hand, began my trek. I thought nothing special of the walk. I spent the entire time daydreaming and jamming out to my music. The street was well lit and there was nobody else out, so that combined with the familiarity of the route made me feel indifferent. Everything was absolutely normal. But then, about halfway down the first portion of my walk, I noticed a police car drive by me. It was one of those undercover cars that's supposed to clearly be a marked vehicle, but it was still obviously a police car. As with a lot of people, my senses heighten when there are police present. I don't freak out or anything, but it was noted. I continued along with my walk, and about a block later I noticed the same police car pass by me again, this time coming from the opposite direction and moving a bit slower. This made me very irritated. I was tired of being harassed by police officers, but this particular night I also had something in my bag which could have potentially gotten me in trouble with the law, so anxiety began to set in as well on top of my irritation. I really did not want to deal with something like this. The officer didn't stop me, but eventually passed by me and turned onto the next street. I decided that picking up the pace, but not at a suspicious rate, would probably be for the best. I made it down to my friend's street and turned onto it. I was thankful that the longest part of the walk was over, and that I only had about 5 more minutes of being on high alert until I was home free. I got maybe about a block and a half down when I saw the cop car for the 3rd time coming my way, passing by me even slower than last time. At this point, I was starting to feel extremely anxious, praying to a god that I didn't believe in to please get this officer away from me. I was almost in tears. Scenarios featuring the worst possible outcome of this situation, involving arrest, getting kicked out of school, and my parents dubbing me the family embarrassment and disowning me, were playing in my head. I was on the verge of an anxiety attack. At this point, I could see my friend's house and picked up the pace just a little bit more. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made it there. She always used the side entrance, which was located at the end of her driveway, about 30 feet long. It was actually more like a small parking lot since the property was a very large house split into several apartments. But just as I began to walk up her driveway, the cop car came speeding down the street and pulled into the driveway after me. This is it, I thought to myself. I was prepared for the worst to happen, but knew that if I played it cool, I would most likely be okay. The cop didn't get out of his car, but rolled his window down instead. I took my headphones out and turned my attention to him. "Good evening, ma'am," he said in a kind and concerned voice. "I just wanted to know, are you okay right now?" Huh? What a weird question. Definitely not what I was expecting. "Yeah, I'm totally fine," I replied. "Just planning on hanging out with a friend tonight. I'm coming from," name of other campus, "and this is her house. Why do you ask?" He looked at me with a look of concern in his eyes. "Well, we got a call from someone who was sitting outside of the emergency room at the hospital. They phoned in to inform us that someone was following you down Arlington Street, the longer stretch of the journey, since from at least the time you were in front of the hospital." This confused me, for not once had there been any sort of indication that I was being followed. "No, sir, I'm fine. I didn't notice anything suspicious, and nobody approached me or anything." Immediately after I said this, a man jumped out of a large bush on the side of my friend's house, about 7 feet away from where I was standing. He looked about 40 to 50 years old, tall, lanky, and was dressed in old, dirty clothing. He was looking right at me with a seriously sinister look in his eyes, smiling ear to ear. In his hand was a large hunting knife. He turned to me and started to cackle while stretching out both of his arms, fully exposing the knife. "Come on, baby. Why'd you have to call your boyfriend on me like this? All I wanted was to ask you for a cigarette." Then, right in front of the police officer, he quickly began to approach me. I didn't pay much attention to what the cop did to handle the situation because I immediately sprinted down the driveway to my friend's door and began to pound as loudly as I could. She must have been in the living room because she answered the door immediately. I bolted inside, hyperventilating and shaking. She looked outside, and there were now 4 cop cars in the driveway. Naturally, she was extremely concerned and confused and asked me what the hell had just happened. I explained the situation to her, and she was horrified. After the police handled it, they knocked on the door to make sure I was unharmed. They didn't know who he was because he had no ID, but it was very likely, based on how he looked and where he was psychologically, that he was one of the many homeless men around here. We have a huge homeless population. They took him away, and I never heard anything about it again. The man must have been extremely sick, as he had the audacity to approach me with a knife directly in front of a police officer. I shudder at the thought of what would have happened to me if a good Samaritan hadn't listened to their gut and called for help. The first thing I did when I got home that night was order pepper spray off of Amazon with 2-day shipping. I never walk around when it's dark with my headphones in anymore, and I always consciously note things that seem off about my surroundings as I walk. Even if you think you have a good gut instinct, never grow complacent, and always stay on the lookout. I am infinitely grateful for that officer, and have since had a serious change of heart regarding my prejudice against the police. Also, this was extremely stupid of me to do in the first place, and I obviously learned my lesson. But I reiterate, never walk around when it's dark with headphones in. This situation may have been prevented if I didn't do this.
He was making human traps by Skog's Fallen. I grew up on the countryside, right next to a national park, frequently visited by nature lovers and bird enthusiasts alike. It was the kind of park where you weren't really allowed to bike or ride horses, only walk or run. But 10-year-old me felt like that was a stupid rule, and I did so anyway, because the trails, they were just perfect for it. I knew fully that I wasn't supposed to do that, and I was caught on several occasions, but nothing much came of it, apart from the half-hearted, "Don't you do it again." And I did. Of course I did. Until one day something frightening happened that
made me stop. My family were horse breeders, and I would often take horses on for rides, usually in the Forbidden Park. This day, very early in the morning, the first day of summer, it was beautiful outdoors, misty, foggy, yet a sky that promised a sunny day ahead. Since it was so early, before 6 o'clock, I knew that there wouldn't be anyone on the trail to see me, so I let the horses set off on full speed along the trail. I only slowed down on the part of the trail that got steep on one side, leading down to a river, because the thought of one step too close to the edge was too much, even for a kid that has no real existing sense of risk versus reward assessment skills. Suddenly, the horse came to a halt and refused to take another step. I grew up with horses all my life, and I knew that this usually indicates that there's something you need to investigate. Is there something with the hooves? Did the horse step on a spot that spooked it? Well, the hooves are fine, but the horse didn't move an inch despite that. That's when I saw it. Someone had set up a trap. A thin, sharp metal wire across the trail, in a perfect neck height for an adult. I stopped and I looked around. I didn't see anyone, and I noticed that the wire was attached to 2 trees and was impossible for me to move. So, I led the horse around it, and to do so, I had to walk up a bit into the wooded area, off the trail, and then back on. That's when I heard the strangest thing ever. I heard singing. There's this one song called Hedge Tommy Telly Gubber, and it was in that melody, but the lyrics were different and sung in a muffled, sniggering voice. Today, I remember only parts of it, but I translated it, and it would have been something like, "Hey, all you runners, come passing by, let the life blood pour out." I, as silently as I could, with a heart in my throat, backed away, got up on the horse, and hurried back as far as I physically could. I knew that I had to tell someone about this, but at the same time, I wanted to avoid riding a horse in a very forbidden trail, on protected trails, so now I had a problem. The old stories about the mad old man living in the shed in the woods, a shed that was a cottage for a local hunter, came back to me as I hung onto the horse for dear life. When I got home, I told my older brother about what happened, and we went back there in his old tow truck. We found the wire trap, unaltered from before, and after searching for a while, we found a spear-like pole in the ground, right on the spot where you would have landed if, well, you were running or jogging over the trail. That's when we called the police. The area was searched, and similar traps are found around all over the place, but no sight of an old man. The following summer, though, there were big news in the local paper about spear-like poles being found right under the water surface, directly under that little tower you're supposed to drive from at the lake. And black garage bags filled with rocks found in the narrow bridges crossing the river, so that if a car would hit it, it risks running off-road and going into the water.
Creep of Walmart by Tolstoy, 1877. When I was 10, my father, older sister, and I went to Walmart. My sister and I liked to wander alone in the stores, so my father had invested in 3 walkie-talkies. I was by myself, walking through the bedding section because I was getting a new bedspread. I was looking intently at one when I felt like I was being watched. I looked over to the beginning of the aisle, and a large man in overalls and dirty brown hair was just looking at me. I decided to walk the other direction and speed walk to the pet section, asking my father through the walkie-talkie where he was, and he didn't answer. I made it to the dog food and was happily next to another shopper when he walked by this aisle. Thinking he didn't see me, I set out a sigh of relief. I asked my father again where he was, and again, no answer. I felt like things weren't safe when I turned around and saw this man was at the end of the aisle, standing there. I quickly walked away with the plan to head to the customer service desk and ask them to call my father. As I walked, parallel to me, the man was matching my steps, keeping me from reaching the front of the store. I changed directions, trying to lose him. In my 10-year-old mind, I thought running to the bathroom would be safe. I ran in and hid in a stall. I heard his footsteps and he entered, and I saw his shoes below the stall's door. Then I heard an angry woman's voice say, "Hey, get out of here, pervert!" The woman knocked on the stall's door and asked, "Are you okay?" I opened it and hugged her and started crying. I told her everything, and she walked with me, holding my hand to the customer service desk. She waited with me until my father showed up. I told him what happened, and despite the lady verifying it, he didn't believe me.
Who Was Outside My Window by Caitlin89. I was around 14 years old. My parents and I lived in the deep south, 3 miles outside my tiny little town in a low crime area. The property my parents owned was a mile down a dirt road and sat in the center of a national forest. We had no neighbors, the nearest home was over a mile away, and no one lived down this road but us. So it had been a long, boring, hot summer day. We did not have air conditioning since my parents felt that it was better to save money. It had rained that evening and cooled the air off. I remember this very specifically. My father had already gone to bed and my mom and I were preparing to go. It was probably around 11 p.m. at the time. I had taken a bath, got into my room, closed the door, took off my robe before getting dressed for bed. So I was sitting on my bed in front of my window, enjoying the cool air. Suddenly, my mother, who has no concept of personal space or privacy, burst into my room and said, "Put some clothes on, you're right in front of the window, you never know who might be out there." In my best bored, long, suffering teenage voice, I rolled my eyes and said, "Mom, there's no one out there." She ran to the window and closed the blinds and simply left the room. Seconds later, I heard what sounded like several male voices laughing. I threw my nightclothes on and ran down the hallway to my parents' room. By the time my dad was able to get dressed and get outside, whoever was out there was long gone. The next morning, we found some cigarette butts underneath my window. My mom later told me that evening she had a bad feeling like something was wrong, and her dogs kept barking. And this is why she had come to check into my room to check on me ever so often. This routine of finding cigarette butts under my window and around the house continued on for several months, and to this day, I can't sleep with a window open, and to this day, I keep finding cigarette butts under my window.
No, You Cannot Give Me a Hug by The Sunday Sleep. This happened earlier tonight. I figured I'd write it out while it's fresh in my brain. Every month in my city, there's this event held at a downtown music venue. Basically, people get up on stage and tell 5-minute stories, all related to whatever the theme of the night is. I'd been attending these storytelling event parties pretty religiously since I discovered them last fall, and have actually become a somewhat established storyteller there. It's always fun for me to listen as well as talk, and it's one of the few places I feel comfortable going to at night by myself. So I'm one of the first people in, as I am a kiss ass and was hoping to help out the people who work there with the setup. Everything was done by the time I got there though, so I just found a good seat and waited for the fun to begin. A man around 30 years old came up to me and said, "I like your shorts. May I give you a hug?" This set off every alarm in my head, but I always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, so I figured he meant no harm and gave him a hug. He told me I was very beautiful, to which I gave him a "thanks, man," and the interaction was done. It was a little weird, but when I saw him hug another woman a few feet away from me, I thought maybe he's just weirdly affectionate. I thought little more of it. Time passed, and after I'd had fun conversations with strangers and told a story on stage, it was intermission. I decided to go to my car and grab my sketchbook because I was feeling fidgety. On the way out, I saw the guy from before. Trying to be friendly, I asked, "Well, how did it go?" He gave me another hug and said, "You were wonderful, you were wonderful." I thanked him and let go, but he didn't let go of me, and he kissed me on the neck. Maybe it was only for a second, but it felt like forever that I was stuck there with him. I don't even remember how I reacted. I was so shocked that I just took off, looking over my shoulder to make sure he hadn't followed me to my car. I went back to the venue determined not to let this ruin my night, but the truth is I don't really remember any of the stories from the second half because I was so shaken up and I couldn't focus. I was texting my mom the whole time, trying not to freak out too much. After the show, I found Janice, a 40-something mom who was also a storytelling regular, and in the past has walked with me to my car after these events. I told her what happened, and she stayed with me until I was in my car. The weird guy was nowhere to be found once I wasn't alone. I'm so grateful for women like Janice. I feel a lot of different emotions about what happened, scared by his actions, angry that I was taken advantage of, and sad that the one place I felt really safe doesn't feel safe anymore. I wanted so badly just to be kind to another person, and he used that against me. You can bet I won't be giving any hugs to strangers or going there alone anymore. Guy who kissed me on the neck tonight, don't ruin things for me any more than you already have. Let's not meet again.
My Worst Nightmare by Creepy Hot Derg. One of my biggest fears is someone breaking into my house when I'm at home. This fear has involved many sleepless nights, anxiety, and panic attacks. It has taken me a long time to really overcome this fear. This fear started when I was 8 years old. My childhood bedroom was the first bedroom you'd come to when you're at the top of the stairs. The stairs also had one really creaky step. I'd gone to bed like many other nights, and my parents had also gone to bed like everyone else. Everyone, at least to my knowledge, was asleep. This particular night, I was awoken by the creepy step. I thought that it was one of my parents going downstairs. Being 8 and very noisy, I got straight out of bed, straight away to see what they were doing. I got to my bedroom door, peered down the stairs, only to be greeted by 2 figures halfway up the stairs. Thinking they were both my parents, I put the leading light on, which was beside my bedroom door, just to see what they were doing. When the light came on, I was staring at 2 complete strangers, a man and a woman, both ill-looking, sunken in faces, and just dirty. The woman was carrying a golf club, and the man had a crowbar. As soon as the light came on and my eyes met with the woman's eyes, she let out a quiet chuckle and put her finger to her mouth and motioned for me to shush. Both of them turned around and left the house. Once it all sunk in, I ran into my parents' room to wake them. They had taken a few electronic things and maybe a little bit of money, but my fear came into my mind because they were coming up the stairs with weapons. If they were caught, they'd be given 12 months suspended sentence. That was almost 20 years ago. This fear has been a part of my life as I've gotten older, and as I've gotten older, I've learned to deal with it. However, as of Monday night, this fear has came flooding back. I live on my own and decided to watch a film downstairs. I must have fallen asleep as I awoke to film finish, and the TV had gone into standby mode. Too lazy to go upstairs to bed, I just decided to sleep on the couch. I had left the curtains of my living room window open, and I couldn't be bothered to shut them. Around 3 a.m., I'm woken up by shouting in my front garden, and by my outside light coming on and shining a bright light in my face. This was followed by my next door neighbor pushing a man against my living room window. My neighbor was shouting, Stay inside and call the police." I did just that, and about 10 minutes later, a policeman turned up to arrest a man that was pushed into my window. My neighbor explained what he heard, the two men talking about outside of our houses, and what sounded like my garden gate opening. When he looked out of his bedroom window, he saw one man with his face pressed against my living room window, trying to get a look in, and another man standing in front of my front door. Instead of ringing the police, my neighbor decided to confront them. He managed to get a hold of the one at the window, but they ended up having a scuffle before my neighbor slammed him into the window and managed to restrain him. The man at the door ran when he saw my neighbor grab his friend. Wedged in between the plastics of my front door was a screwdriver. Not sure if he was trying to pop the lock or snap the plastics to get in. This is possible to do to doors since I've lost my keys and I've actually had to do this a few times myself. So the door was already damaged. I am grateful for my next door neighbor and the police. The police told me that the man they had arrested only had been released from prison the following week. Only except that they were rearrested for a burglary and an attempted rape. So thanks to the man for renewing my fears and burglaries out there. So burglars, creepy rapists, whatever the hell you want to call yourself, let's not meet again.
Internet Creeper by You're Confusing. Hey everyone, I was just lurking through Let's Not Meet and saw a story that reminded me of something that happened to me when I was 12 or 13. I'm 18 now, and I thought I would share. So at 12 to 13, all my friends were getting into makeup, clothes, etc., and were constantly buying nice designer stuff. My family were broke at that time, so I was never able to get this stuff. This led to me and my best friend Emily looking for ways to find money. Where I live, you can't get jobs at 12 or 13. So we were thinking of doing jobs for our neighbors, like walking dogs or washing cars. Emily came up with the idea of me doing modeling for money. She said you can put pictures of yourself online and photographers will get in touch with you and you could potentially get money. So, being stupid, we went on loads of modeling sites, most of which probably weren't legit, and started putting my pictures everywhere. We also put my phone number on there so that people could contact me. Anyway, nothing really came of this, but the next weekend I was back around Emily's house and my phone rang. It was an unknown number, and I answered. From what I could tell at the time, it was an older man with a thick northern accent. He started off by saying he had seen my picture online and complimented me, saying that I was very pretty. He then went on to explain that he could have a potential job for me, so I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said that he would like me to come to an office in the city and read a script, but the script was quite mature and he wasn't sure if I was old enough. I told him I was 13, and this is where it got weird. He started asking me questions about my body, e.g. if I had pubic hair yet, if my breast had come in yet, and how big they were. He even asked if I had to shave my legs yet or not, or if I had grown hair there yet. At the time I was stupid and young and didn't realize that these questions were messed up, so I actually answered him. He also explained all about the script that he wanted me to read. This was basically him describing people having an orgy, and I was supposed to read a script about the orgy? As we continued to speak, his breathing got louder and he sounded as if he was doing something he shouldn't be. Then he asked if we were home alone. We were, but instead I said no, that my friend's mom was home. He replied by saying, well, why is her little purple car gone then? This freaked me out and I hung up. My friend's mom did have a small purple car at the time. I have no idea how he would have known that. Maybe it was someone we knew? I'm not sure, but anyway, after that, I went back online and took all of my pictures down from the modeling sites.
My Russian Friend by Soviet Radio. This all took place junior year of high school, which was about 9 years ago now. I attended a private Catholic school in Northern California, not very large, but each class had maybe about 50 to 60 students. Some of the classes were taught off campus at a nearby community college, and you could get college credit for them if you took the test at the end of the semester. Well, Since about 8th grade, there was this girl in class named Natasha. She had a heavy Russian accent, was very smart, beautiful, and opinionated. She always called out people when they were being dicks, and was the first to volunteer for any sort of sport or extracurricular activity. Natasha was a very popular girl, but in school that is that small, social cliques weren't that big of a deal. All of us had gone to school together for most of our lives. I have some Russian heritage as well, and I've always enjoyed hearing about her family. She didn't talk much about when they were in Russia though. Well, one day, Natasha didn't come to school. The next day, she isn't there either. The teachers won't talk about it. On the 4th day, her absence. A rumor starts going around that she got deported. People joke about it at first, but then someone takes it the wrong way, and now it's a whole widespread set of gossip. Except the next day, Natasha does show up, and she's different. She doesn't talk to anyone anymore. She's super quiet. I remember that day clearly because her makeup wasn't done and her hair was in a tight braid, when normally she wore it in many elaborate and stylish ways. She says that her family had an emergency and that was it. It was about 2 weeks later that the 5 of us were off campus at college when Natasha received a phone call from school that her mother was there to pick her up. Everyone felt uneasy at this, and Natasha sat up front at the sidewalk with a couple of the girls, and I remembered her looking very pale and squeezing another girl's hand until her mother pulled up and got her. Natasha didn't come back to school. This was very dramatic at the time, and everyone talked about it constantly. Her MySpace was shut down. Actually, a little bit before the day she left, it was shut down. And none of her closest friends knew what the hell was going on. The whole thing was very creepy. It wasn't until I was in college at a different state, I got back in touch with an old friend, and while catching up, her name came up. He used to be good friends with her and told me what happened, the details of it coming through her close friends years later. Apparently, Natasha and her mother fled to Russia when she was only 6 years old to get away from her father, who was involved in organized crime. Her mother married an American man who worked in IT and was able to bring the grandparents over to live with them, as well as start his own company and become somewhat successful. They kept their slightly less expensive apartment in the city and moved into a nicer house in the suburb outside, keeping the apartment for the grandparents and in the stepfather's name, while the real father held a grudge because he believed the daughter was stolen from him and apparently spent years networking trying to find them until he found out all the nitty-gritty details on where they were at. Unfortunately, the information was a little older by the time he received it, and he believed that the mother and daughter lived in a city apartment. What had happened was that her father sent someone over, and they planned to poison the stepfather, mother, and daughter by covering the door and simply filling the place with mustard gas. The grandfather was the one who received the most injuries from this and was hospitalized during those days she was out of school. He had gone blind and suffered some serious injuries, especially due to his age, but he eventually survived. I didn't get the details on how the family knew what had happened, but Natasha pulled from school and they moved shortly after. I heard the stepdad stayed behind and sold his business and joined the rest of the family in whatever state they had moved to. I know where, but I don't think that the names are still the same, and even if they didn't change, I wouldn't want to risk another attack. I ended up being able to find Natasha on Facebook a couple years later under a different pseudonym, through mutual friends of ours. Once again, she had changed her name, she's doing okay. But her father, let's not meet.